talking about the drawdown and talking about drawdowns. The presenters that we have today, and I have pictures of them, but for some reason, WebEx isn't letting me share, and I don't want to hold you guys up too long because everybody else can share their screens. But we have great presenters today. So our first presenter that we have is Danny Rich, and he is a PhD. He's the senior color physicist at Sun Chemical. He's also involved in print standards and works on many of the print standards that Idealliance and other groups have put out throughout the world. Super knowledgeable, and one thing I love about Danny Rich is that even though he's super genius, he's great at explaining things in a way that people can understand, which is not always the case with super smart people. So he's able to do that, and he's going to talk about the drawdown, and being someone who works for an ink company, he'll be able to give a pretty good perspective on what it can do and what it can't do. Our second panelist is going to be Sonja Dearden, and she is a print production manager, VP at Lint, and is in charge of print and their brand colors for Lint USA, and does a lot of this and deals with drawdowns and color matching all the time. So she's super experienced at it and has a lot of the perspective of the brand, which is very different than the perspective of the ink company usually. Our third panelist is Kevin Coneeny, and he is the president of Universal Color Corp, and that's an ink company in the Northeast. He's an ink chemist as well and has worked for other ink companies before he started his own company. And he'll be kind of following up as the third presenter and kind of answering some questions from Sonja and giving his take on what a drawdown is good for and what it isn't good for. Now, a drawdown means a lot of things to a lot of people, and that's one thing we're going to learn today is what is it good for, what isn't it good for. And when I first talked to Kevin and Danny, one of the first questions is, what do you mean by a drawdown? Because they'll talk about there's a couple different ways a drawdown happens. This is sponsored by BrandQ, which is an Idealliance program for brands where we communicate. We focus on communication of brands, how to educate and teach people how to understand and communicate color and how to validate and measure. So BrandQ has classes. Our next class is probably in April. We're still working on the date. But we've done classes for some of the largest brands in the world and taught them how to build their brand standards and work with their supply chain. So if you're interested in that, we'll have a little more info on the last slide once that comes up. So I'm going to turn that over to Danny, and he's going to start off, and everybody will talk for maybe 15 minutes, and at the end we'll should have about 15 minutes for questions. So Danny, to you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I'm seeing. Is everybody else seeing it?
Yep.
Good. I'm also seeing the box that I don't want to see. Okay. So, ink drawdowns and color standards. And so, there we go. What is a drawdown? Well, I found a nice definition in PrintWiki. It says a drawdown, a means of evaluating the color mixing of a printing ink by depositing a layer of the mixed ink on the surface of a substrate using a smooth-edged knife. Drawdown is one of the three basic tests used to determine the accuracy of color matching and mixing processes, the compatibility of the various inks combined, the performance of the ink on the substrate, and the drying characteristics of the ink. Drawdown is also called a pull-down. All right? So that's the ink guy's concept of drawdown. This is how we make a drawdown. Here's some ink knives, some narrow ones, some wide ones. Basically, we would drop a bunch of offset ink down on some substrate, and then we put the knife edge at one end of it, and we just drag it down the length of the substrate. Okay? The issue, of course, is these were all developed originally by offset printers as a quick and dirty way to evaluate paste inks without emulsification on a press. Very convenient for those guys. Newer techniques, here's a wire wound bar drawdown. So we put a small amount of even a liquid ink up here, and then we press down on this round bar that's got really thin steel wire on it, and the ink is sucked up into the spacing between the wires, and then as you draw down through it, it's laid out onto the substrate here. He's making a print. When you finish, this is an example of one. This is on a contrast card. So here you can see the haziness of the ink over the black, which says ink isn't transparent. And then down below you get an estimate of the color, but you'll notice it's very variegated. It's not really smooth print. So your eye can integrate those. Your spectrophotometer maybe or maybe not. So drawdowns were really popular because the inks were controlled for density. So this is some slides I took from an Idealliance presentation I made a few years ago with Ray Shedler. It shows here film thickness along the horizontal axes, and then on the left axis it's color difference, on the right axis it's density. So the green curve is density, the blue curve is color difference. You can see that as you change from the nominal 1 micron, which is where most offset presses are aimed, that small differences, tenths of a micron, don't really make big changes in the density. The slope is almost flat, but it makes a lot of difference in the colors. So if you allow variations in your film thickness, you're going to get very different colors. We first discovered this and reported on this in ISO 2846, which is an international standard for the color of ink. And it was then pointed out that you can't use drawdowns for testing against this international standard, just that you can't control the film thickness carefully enough. So what sometimes people end up doing is they will use a plate that's wedged, so that when you pull the ink down across it, it's got thicker ink on one end and thinner ink on the other, and then you find where along that wedge you get the color you think you want. It's a little empirical way to do it, but then you still don't know if it's right or not. So here's a better way to do it, and this is the way we've been doing it at Sun Chemical for probably close to 20 years, close to the time that I've been in the company. We use what's called printability testers. They're really small benchtop presses. The one on the left with the red ink on it, that's a gravure printability tester. The plate you can see is horizontal down below, and the substrate is wrapped on a cylinder, and so you pull the system actually pushes the roller with the substrate down across the plate, and you pull the ink up out of the gravure plate. On the upper right is the IGT-C1, which is the one that we like. The IGT has a number of different variations. The device here on the left side with the kind of white ring, that's the print station. In this case, the paper is a small, narrow piece of or substrate is part of narrow rectangle, and that sled pulls it underneath the inked plate. And the thing on the right is an inking station where you put ink down and you roll it and you turn these things until the ink is uniformly distributed. So one of the nice things about these is you can actually measure the film thickness, so you know if you got it right. And on the bottom, this is a Harper QD automated proofer for Flexo. And here it takes a hand type proofer, but there's a blade on it and a roller and an analox, and then you ink the analox up, and then this runs with a motor down the length, and you can see the stripe. And these prints are very smooth and uniform. So when properly operated, then the printability test is more consistent than any manual system. That is, we've taken these, and Sun Chemical is a big Six Sigma organization, and we've tested these against Six Sigma requirements, and we found that at least the three that we've shown you can pass Six Sigma, which means that their consistency is within plus and minus 3 Sigma. Okay, so we don't make drawdowns anymore. We make lab ink proofs, and we've taken this sort of almost to an art. So For consistent color, we make an ink proof on a production substrate, and that may be paper, a foil, film, whatever the case. Include all the appearance steps, including tone scales and varnish and lamination. Capture all the optical properties using multiple scans with a high-precision spectral colorimeter, and then export those scans via a CXF file and then import those into a database. So there's products like Pantone Live, which we are a big supporter of. That is one example of those. There are other companies that also can offer you databases, but all future proofs are then tested against the stored data, and the stored data doesn't change, but your proofer and your inks and all those things will, by nature of the second law of thermodynamics, they'll change with time, and so you always have to go back and update them. But you can see here, I showed a picture of one of our rigs. This has the Spectri, which is last generation X-Rite instrument, but you can see we have multiple prints, multiple tones, and we read that whole thing, and it gets all put together and averaged, so we get pretty good, pretty reliable numbers. When we do it this way, we find that you can generate physical examples of the digital data that are in agreement to less than 1 DE00. So critical ink color should be proofed using automated proofing press, not drawdowns. Don't call them drawdowns, it detracts from their value. So if you call it a drawdown, people think it's something cheap and easy. It's not. It's very precise, these instruments. Set up standard procedures on the operation of your proofer and assess your gauge R&R. You should be able to get the total variability of making a print should be less than 10% in the proofing process. And then measure the reflection or the reflectance of the precision proof. Save those data away, because those are what you want to put the stake in the ground, because you always want to have the same color. And we already saw how changing the film weight can change your color. And so you don't want to do that. You want to be at the same place. So over time, the proofs will be about a half a delta E from the digital aims, unless the substrate changes. So if somebody sells you, a new substrate and it's off, then the measurement will be different, because you're measuring a transparent media over the top of that. But then you can make changes to your other raw materials to bring you back again. So that's it.
Yep. Good. No, that's good. So, and then next will be Sonja, and Sonja is going to go from the perspective of a brand and how they actually use a drawdown and what they think about it. Before you hop off, Danny, what's the biggest danger of a drawdown?
I think the biggest danger from my perspective is that you get a color match at a film thickness you can't make on press.
Okay, yeah.
So you're standing there with an ink print, and you can't seem to match it on the press, and no matter what you do on the press, you can't get that much ink down, because it's real easy to put 2 microns of ink down with a blade. Yeah.
But in real life, not so easy.
That's right.
Yeah. Great. Awesome. Sonja, you can start up, and Steve, you can pass it over to her, and she's got a few things to share too.
I should be up. Can everyone see that screen?
We sure can.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Danny. This definitely is a good segue for me. We actually use quite a few Sun Chemical inks with some of our vendors, and I've also had the pleasure of having to consult with Kevin to help me on some issues that I've had with some different lighter colors that we have in our palette. So as you can see from this slide, for me, the big challenge is this is just one of the brands that Lint has, and we probably deal with about 40 bags. And as you can see, each bag has 2 and possibly 3 PMS colors associated with it. Mm-hmm. And Lint holds some very tight guidelines when coming to our colors. So when we're on press, we're looking for our colors to be about 2 delta E, and on the main top 5 brands, we're looking at it to be, if we'd prefer it to be under 1 delta E. So when it comes to doing lab ink proofs or drawdowns, depends on which, I would say it depends on which company that is doing the ink for me. We're looking for that drawdown to be well under 1 delta E, and we're also looking at the hue angle on these as well. For instance, that number 1 bag at the front of the line, that milk bag, very challenging because that ink can swing to a little bit yellow and a little bit blue. And when that happens, when you're sitting on shelf in a store, we don't want that swing to happen across the different sizes of our bags. So what we're looking for is a lot of consistency before we even get on press to make sure that we're holding these tolerances really tight. And that's probably the main reason that we use the drawdowns. For a time, I actually did go away from using drawdowns and was just relying on our Epson proof. But I did realize there was some variances. I feel like the Epson proof, and I do have a GMG rip on there, so I get some very decent proof out of my proofer. But there were still some variances in color that I still needed that drawdown to be done for me in order to know that the printer, when I was on press, could actually hit that ink color. So there was a little bit of a struggle there initially that they couldn't get what I was getting from the Epson proof. So I do rely on the Epson proof. It's helpful for my brand to know what they're looking at as they're going through bags and making new flavors. However, the drawdown for me now has become, more the solid guideline to say, all right, this is the actual color that we're choosing. And the other thing is it's also important for us because that milk bag also gets produced on foil. So obviously I've got to do a lot of ink changes when I'm moving to a foil substrate. We've got some instances where we use maybe a nice bright white sheet on some of our folding cartons when these move to folding cartons. But I've got to be really conscious that not only, and you'll see this in the next slide, I am printing gravure, I am printing flexo, and that flexo is also on a metallized substrate. It's backed with metallic, and then I've also got a folding carton. So I've got one brand color that needs to go to multiple vendors in multiple countries and across multiple substrates in different printing techniques. So for me, I have a pretty large set of drawdown books for each one of our flavors, as you call them, for lint. I would say that metallic inks are probably really where the challenge happens and really where we rely on the drawdowns, because we also often will take that reflex blue and decide to make it a metallic ink. So we're not always going by the Pantone book for a metallic ink. We are often having the vendor create a specialized ink for us. And that was a big learning for me because I realized that when it came to possibly that reflex blue, I could make that blue be very pale or much deeper and richer depending upon how much metal was mixed into those inks. So that really became helpful for me to see all these different drawdowns from different perspectives of how much metal was being put into that ink. The other big thing that we run into is substrate, definitely a huge one. And that light blue color that you're looking at here on the screen, hardly ever hit that. I think Kevin is actually probably a little bit familiar with this one because that is probably one of my more challenging colors because I'm not going to get, and I've had to explain to Brand that we're probably never going to get under, we're 2, I think maybe, Kevin might have gotten it down to 2. I think my actual printer could probably only get it to about 3, and that was as close as we were going to get with this color because the paper just shows through because the ink is just too light, and we just realized that we weren't going to get there. Another big thing for us is the coating. So on that middle one, what we've realized is I can run a UV coating. We sometimes run an aqueous coating. Big difference what the coating does to each each ink. If I am using UV inks on normal Pantone colors, I get some variances, and usually we can work with that. My bigger challenge comes when I am using metallic inks with a UV coating. Don't do it. If you can avoid it, don't do it. We've got pretty strict guidelines for scuffing, so we always have to go with the UV inks right now. But if you can avoid using UV inks when you're using UV coatings when you're using metallic inks, that's probably the better way to go. Aqueous, we don't have many troubles. The other big trouble I have, especially with that red milk, is if I decide to use a matte coating, because matte coating turns red pink. So then you have to rework that ink. So again, these are all instances where it's really important to have your print vendor and your ink supplier hopefully they've got a really good ink supplier that does have the proper equipment to be able to test this stuff and be able to give you realistic parameters of what they're capable of being able to achieve depending upon your coating, depending upon your paper, depending upon how it's running. So there's many different variables in there that really can make that ink change. And when you're trying to hold it to a certain brand color, that can be a definite challenge. For limitations, again, I only see it in the pastels and the light colors. That's probably the biggest area that I see the limitations, and then also on the foil backgrounds. And like I said, it's also the ink lab being really skilled at what they're doing. I have definitely sent drawdowns back 4 or 5 times because it still amazes me sometimes that I'll get an ink swatch and I scan it. I do have a TouchCon device. I scan it and it will come in at 3 delta E, and I've seen my hue angle be somewhere at like minus 4.5. And so I would appreciate, it's been a learning process trying to get the print supplier to really communicate with the ink vendor what we're looking for and how tight we're holding those guidelines. And as I said, we do work with an Epson printer with a GMG RIP, and I have an interesting story on that one because there was a particular instance where a designer actually picked a color, ran it through the proofer, and everyone loved this bag color, and it, went through all its rounds, and there were 5 bags made and 2 boxes made on it. And as we were getting ready to send them to the printer, I thought, I'm just going to do a quick scan on this proof to see where that color's coming up. And they were calling out a color that the proofer was absolutely not coming anywhere near that color. So say they were calling out, Pantone 2907, and when I actually scanned it, we ended up having like 538 was really the color. And so we had to go through the files and remake all the files to actually match what the proofer was getting. So that's the other thing is, not only does the ink vendor need to be, really good at what they're doing, but on my end, I realized very quickly that I can't rely solely on my Epson to be giving me some good Pantone outputs. I need to and I do have a proofer on my RIP, but we have had to optimize some colors. So Ron has been instrumental in helping me optimize my key flavors, my top 5 flavors. We go in there and we really tweak it really tight so that we're using my drawdown to actually get the Epson to match to closer to what my drawdown is looking like, so that I get better proof to drawdown matches, so that we're, speaking apples to apples when the brand team is going through and reviewing these proofs. So that was a big learning on that one, having to completely change. For 2 months we're talking that this particular item was a certain Pantone color, and lo and behold, the proofer wasn't actually executing what that Pantone color was, and we had to switch it and go through all the files and update them all. So for that, I think that's all I have as far as the importance of the drawdowns and how we use them and what are the watches to be looking out for when you're getting these drawdowns. So I think I can turn this back over to Kevin, possibly.
Okay.
Yeah.
See if we can pop up my screen here.
So.
Steve, did you have that? Did you have my?
Not yet. Yeah, I just sent you the thing, so just click accept to be the host or the presenter.
I just did again.
So Sonja, while Kevin's setting up, when multiple printers send you drawdowns, do they look the same?
When multiple vendors, I'm sorry, I was taking my phone off from mute. I'm sorry, when they do what again, Ron?
Yeah, if you get drawdowns from like 5 different suppliers, do they look the same mostly or not mostly? Or
I would say folding carton vendors mostly. Because again, like I said, I'm very clear on what my expectations are from those drawdowns when I'm getting them. I think I struggle a little bit more with probably the Gravure vendors, and I attribute that more to them using a couple different ink suppliers, and they're in different countries. So sometimes, and either ink person, please feel free to chime in on this, that there might be a different ink makeup. There might be a different formula that they're using for inks. that might change how the appearance of the ink ends up being. For instance, we have one of our top items is the assorted bag, which is a gold metallic ink, and I have not in 2 years been able to get the 2 gravure vendors that I used to be able to match those inks as perfectly as Brand would like to see them. I would agree that they're pretty close, and we've even done print trials, but I'm still struggling and at a loss on what I can do to get them to actually look exactly alike.
Yeah,
but usually the rest of them on the main flat colors, I can get them to come together.
So some of that may get worse as you go along. For instance, you showed up a design with a lot of reflex blue in it. Today, there's only one vendor in the entire world of reflex blue, and it's this little company in India. Whatever they churn out of their reactor, that's what they ship. It's different every time.
And that varies all the time.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the shades go from red to green and whatnot. But again, even in reflex blue, it's actually not really used in formulations today because of its chemical resistance or lack thereof.
Yeah.
It's usually made up of a phthalo blue and a
violet.
Carbazole violet.
Right.
So,
sometimes Carbazole is not so easy to find either.
And right, it's expensive, and it can shift as well.
Yep.
I just want to make sure. Can people see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet.
So, Raman, I'm going to have to drop off.
All
All right. Thank you very much, Danny. We appreciate your coming and sharing, and always appreciate hearing you. Thanks.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Danny.
Thank you.
I'm popping this up. I see it on. You guys know can see this?
Yeah. So Kevin,
No.
Kevin, no, we can't see it. Just go up to the upper left where it says File, Edit, Share. Click Share, and then My Screen, which is in fact your screen.
Yeah.
And
you see it?
No, not yet. I'm going to take control back here real quick, and I'm going to hand it back to you. And you should have a pop-up that says, "Do you want to be the presenter?" So you just need to say yes. So I'm changing to you, Kevin. It should be coming over right now.
Sharing slide. Matthew Lewis, how are the respects? Sharing into slide brand. It's not asking me. I got Steve, I got Sonja, and I got Tim Bashell up at the top.
So one sec, we'll work through it here for you, and we'll get up because we had it earlier. So we see viewing intro slide. That's my slide. That's what everybody's seeing. That first one when we start the thing.
Mm-hmm.
Does it show by your name? It shows that you have like a little ball right by your initials, KC.
I don't even see KC. I've got three. I got 3 people up there, but I don't got me. Danny dropped off.
Yeah. Well, I have you, so I see it there. So go up to the File, Edit, Share first, real quick, and click on Share, and then tell me what you see there.
I just see some of my documents, but not the document that I have it in.
Yeah, no, on the WebEx. On the WebEx itself, not on your file, but on the WebEx.
What do I see?
Yeah, or it should be like really upper left corner. There's like a little icon, File, Edit, Share, View, Communicate, might say participant, but
yep. Okay.
So share, and then drop down, say My Screen.
Mhm.
There we go. Yeah.
There.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. So now we can see your screen, and we're seeing where it says the WebEx application. All right, now we see your desktop and your email.
Shit. Oh, good.
Mm-hmm. And so there we go.
Hey, we got it. Okay.
Hey,
sorry about that, everybody.
No problem.
Everybody got that? Everybody can see the screen?
All right, Ken?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
All right, just starting it out. This obviously I'm just being showing the inside of a laboratory or one of our ink labs that we have at one of our customers, and this is kind of going to reinforce what Danny was showing as far as applications. He was showing different printing machinery. This is a common one used in the industry for quick, easy printing. It's called a Little Joe proof press, and basically you're basically taking a known volume of ink, which is applied here. It's rolled out. I'm going to get a customer we're going to roll that down. I'm just showing you the process here. This is obviously this is an operation, personal thing where people have different rollout systems. So it is a little less effective than, say, the proof bow, but it's commonly used here. We're printing down, and again, this is a 485 red. Just showing you how we get to our colors here. That's one of my operators, Kenny. Obviously, we then read them into the spectrophotometer, which we have. So these are called Drawdown. This is an actual Drawdown, which is actually a print, what we were talking about earlier. Secondly, there's called a Drawdown, which Danny was showing as a straight knife scrape blade. This is what's used inside the industry for manufacturing. It's very old. It's very dated. But again, this is what we started out with, and this is what we use as quality control. Obviously, you get a visual there. Not everybody can distinguish the difference between one side to the other. That's what takes the human expertise into it. The next one we're going to show is basically taking a master sample and a batch sample, and we're taking it on which he was talking to you about, a grind gauge, which he actually had different film weights. This is actually a single film 3 mil. And when you take the master and you take the batch, you scrape them down, and what you do is you roll it out, and we read the color, look at the color, and again, there's this color again, printed out afterwards. Let me just move on here. There's obviously a spectral reading. I'm basically just showing you the inside of a lab of how we get to color and how we get to a proof. Obviously, everything's moved to spectral differences now, which is great because we got a lot of new people coming in, like this guy right here, Dari, who works. He's a temp co-op from a high school. So teaching them both ways nowadays with the numerical versus the visual is really cool because I think they understand the numerical well. This picture is basically showing a pastel, and a pastel printed on 2 different substrates. In this case, we printed on this is on a commercial grade, and this is, obviously pastels are very difficult to control. Obviously the substrate is extremely important as far as achieving anything because of the transparency. This is printed on an SBS, and the color differences are pretty wide there. These are the same 2 substrates of the same print you saw previous to that. Basically, the one on the top has no optical brightener. The commercial grade coated stuff does. So you can see what the optical brighteners do. This is done under a UV light. So basically, the background of that particular substrate, which is an SBS, which is a board, which is common in the packaging industry, this color would be almost impossible to achieve. I mean, and again, the film weight that you can put down wouldn't be able to cover the dirtiness of the substrate and the lack of the optical brightener. There's the 2 colors again right there, side by side. One matches, one doesn't. There's the optical brightener under the dark light. We shut all the lights off, and basically you're seeing the difference between 2 different substrates and what the possibility of achievement is with the the substrate itself, which is GOS. Again, these get read spectrally again. We go here, and basically here's a blue. I know people are talking about blues, and we were talking about reflex blue just a minute ago. Obviously, reflex blue isn't made up of reflex blue because of the chemical, the lack of chemical resistance to it. So here it is on a commercial grade stock, which is pretty good. It's a good thing. Here it is on an SBS. Once again, on no optical brightness, you can see the dirtiness. To achieve some of these colors, it's almost impossible. So again, there it is again. Yeah, so here's a 485 red, and just to show people the difference between one ink on multiple substrates. You have obviously variable substrates here. You have clay coats, you have board stocks, you have commercial grades, and then different shades, which probably in the bag or packaging industry could be used. But just to show you that what one color looks like on a variation of multiple stocks with the exact same film weight. Well, pretty much that's it. I just, showing you guys what we do in the lab here. And again, one of the things is how do you achieve color from plant to plant to plant. And what we see out there is, application is one. Like Sonja showed you, you're doing 3 different applications, gravure, flexo and offset. They all have different abilities to achieve different film weights. I think the substrate is extremely important. I think the reality of achieving a color is extremely important, and I think drawdowns, which is AKA prints, we actually do a physical print, is important with a numerical because you want to bring the two of those together. So if you get on press and you have a delta E only without a physical, and there's a variation in the substrate, and you get to the press, now the press is down. Now hopefully there's an ink vendor on site because now you're adjusting color, and that's time and that's money. And you want to make sure that when you get to press, you have both a physical and a numerical, and you can apply those both and plug those into your database.
Yep. That's good. So the first thing before we get to questions, my first thing would be, Sonja, do you have specific ink questions you would ask him as a brand and a customer? If you don't, that's okay. I just, with what you just saw,
no, I mean, my biggest struggle is more the metallic inks and the challenges in trying to get metallic inks to match at different vendors. That's probably my bigger challenge. I think I understand a little bit about the substrates. Maybe if you'd asked me 4 years ago, I might have a lot more questions than I have now because I've certainly learned about, like I said, how the coatings change the color and of the ink, or how the substrates change the color of the ink, as Kevin is showing there in that image.
Sonja, with your metallics, are you having multiple applications? So if you go from a gravure to an offset to a flexo, is that where you're seeing it, or you're seeing it within the same application, i.e.
within the same application?
In the same applications, okay. So even batch to batch to batch, so you print one time, you print another time.
Not batch to batch, but it's more vendor, like I have 2 gravure vendors and in 2 different countries, and one can just not match the other, and they use 2 different ink vendors. So the thought process, even to me, this came up last week, is if this is such a big item for us, do we go about purchasing our own ink in this particular instance and giving it to the vendors instead of them trying to match it?
Well, that would streamline it because who knows what their vendors, what they're picking from their raw materials. I mean, there are not a lot of metallic raw material suppliers out there. There's just a handful. So, again, they could be picking for cost that we can go into a lower grade one. But again, I think if you streamlined it to that one vendor, you hold that one vendor accountable for everything. So now they're on the hook first. The printer saying, okay, well, my vendors, I hit this number, or if I hit this number, it may look good in the lab, but when you apply it, the metal flake may be of a different size or particle size, and you just might not be achieving it. They may be using a different blend of colorant to get to, say, like that reflex blue you were talking about with it.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and that's the biggest issue is one vendor is saying, I don't know, we can't, there's nothing else we can think of to even do to try to match the, preferred A vendor's ink. And, so I've said to Brand, well, they've come as close as they're going to come, and so we probably need to just accept this. And from a consumer standpoint, I don't think the consumer is going to see that much of that much of a change. That's the other thing. Those of us in this business can see the finest minute detail, but from a consumer standpoint, I think that you need to set the expectations. So that was my option. Either we accept this or we research it. But as I said, Ron and I were just in Europe together, and there was an ink guy there. And I think that there is a little bit of a different formulation that each country allows to happen. So I think that is this is possibly a little piece of the issues that we run into with these.
I don't know who your ink vendors are, and I don't need to ask, but does one of them have the accessibility to service all the other areas, meaning the preferred one, or is it a logistics thing?
I believe that the preferred ink vendor or printer with their ink vendor could potentially, I think they possibly could be capable of supplying it to the other vendor.
Oh, interesting. So I think at this point, that's actually a great conversation. At this point, let's open up to questions, Steve.
Yeah, well, we had a number of great questions come in, and you know, it was really unique to, sorry, Ron?
This is Tim Beckley talking. It's not Steve, just to let you guys know. He's the president of Idealliance. So keep going, Tim.
Yeah, so one of the neat, great things is Ron and I were able to be with Sonja with one of her print service providers in Germany and see that interaction take place, which we've been doing that around the world, but it was great to be able to work with her and watch that interaction and it all come together. But I'll start with a question that came in for Sonja. It's a great one. So Sonja, this question was for you actually, was how are you communicating color to your print vendors? LAB values, physical target, or spectral data?
We have them take the data right from this is a two-pronged question. I mean, a two-pronged answer, because pretty much we go straight to the Pantone guidelines. So whatever, and Ron, you can speak a little bit to this because you assist.
Yep.
But we have them use exactly what Pantone specs out for their LAB values. Now, if you noticed on that first sheet that lists all the bags, we do put the lab value, like I pull the lab values from Pantone and I put them on a sheet so that the lab values are also specified. The only time that sometimes changes is there is an occasion that we might create our own color using, our Epson printer. Then at that point, if I did something like creating my own special color, then I would actually pull the LAB values. We're doing it right now for our foil stuff. So we changed the ink color on foil, and we did it by standing on press and making changes on press. And so now I've got that data. So I took one swatch and I backed it in white so that I would have at least some chance of recreating that, picking up that lab value and being able to communicate it to the other vendors that will also need to apply this same color ink to foil substrate. So there are occasions that I'll supply the lab values because I'm picking up a special.
Do you also require a physical print with that, Sonja?
Sorry, what was that?
One other thing, actually, let me jump in for 1 second. Then also that library that she refers them to has spectral data in it. And so for ink guys like you, Kevin, it's, the Pantone, the Pantone Plus library, which has spectral and everything in it.
Yep. That 485 red print that I showed you. So obviously we have the library, the Pantone library built in. But what we do is when we open up a printed Pantone book, we read specific colors. So even the book, so it depends on what the customer's looking at. The customer can have the book or they can have the LAB. I prefer they have both, especially if it's a very important job, so they make sure that they match up. And then on press they can read it. And if there's any adjustment, i.e. with the substrate, which there's a lot, you at least have both of them because that 485 red did not match its own system in its own printed book. So it was off a 3.2 delta E. So, and I can guarantee you if there's a book that's a year or 2 or 3 or 4 years older, it's a lot different right now. So I think having both of them, obviously having the spectral data should leave the ink manufacturer to make the adjustment to get to that LAB. But I think for the printer, he should have both physical and numerical on hand. And like I said, in the packaging industry, those substrates change quite a bit. You are adjusting that formulation quite a bit. And like I said, in the instance of like those light blues, they're not made out of reflex blue. They're made out of carbazole violet and phthalo blue. There's metamerism as well. So you have to be under the right light source all the time. I mean, you could be on press under 5,000K. You walk off the press into daylight, all of a sudden that blue was beautiful on press and it walked off. So again, it's not the actual physical pigments that are used in that. So again, rebuilding that spectral data is important in knowing the light source.
Yeah, and also when you do a custom standard like you're talking about, Sonja, measuring not just the LAB, but capturing the full spectral and all that too to communicate.
Yeah.
So another question that came up, and this actually was on a conversation that Ron and I were in a call this morning with, I think they're the third largest brand in the world. Linton, the company that we were having this conversation with, happened to be extremely well educated, informed, and ahead of the curve in regards to knowledge of color management, communication. everything related to color theory. So they're measuring their expectations with their service providers. They've been through BrandQ and G7, and so is the company that we were having this conversation with and work with around the world, just like we did with Lint. So this question is, I'll give it to Ron, is what are your thoughts about proofing the color on a calibrated display?
So you mean soft proofing?
Yeah. Yep.
Yep. So soft proofing for CMYK works, relatively well and is pretty good. Although it's not perfect, because you'll notice that when they sell a soft proofing viewing booth, it's got like a dimmer on it, which doesn't happen in the press room. There's no dimmer. But soft proofing for CMYK is pretty good. Soft proofing for spot colors, not very easy. There's only a few products out there that can do that. And in general, with soft proofing, you have to have pretty good monitors. So soft proofing for CMYK is, pretty good if you're set up, you're profiled, you have a good monitor. That's easy. Soft proofing for spot color, unless you've invested in something like Remote Director or other products that are really dialed into showing those spot colors, soft proofing of spot colors doesn't work very well.
Okay, great.
Very difficult. Yeah.
I'll shoot this question to Kevin. And Kevin, here's the question. Is there a reason that ink vendors are not able to achieve more opaque inks?
Opaque inks, again, opacity is due to the pigment itself, and it's due to the amount of film weight that you can put on there. The more film you put on, the more opacity that you have. Being only to apply 1 micron doesn't allow much film weight to cover up the indifferences of the substrates themselves. So I think it's an application issue. I think if you went to a gravure or a much thicker film weight, I think you're going to have a better chance of getting in. And obviously, we don't want to go to silkscreen, but that's a whole different animal. But I'll look at a job and I'll say, there's no way you're getting that yellow ink on that red substrate on an offset process. There's just not enough opacity to cover that up. So you're going to have to go to a thicker film weight to get that.
Right. This question actually was in the conversation this morning, again referencing in regards to the brand conversation. And I don't know if there's a direct, there's not a direct answer to it, but there's probably a relative answer to it. So I'll ask the question, and anybody can chime in. What is the normal expiry life of ink on paper production, print ink, proof, QC, color standard, PMS book? So it's kind of that's the way it was written. So I think they're asking what is the normal lifespan of a Pantone book, and it says in parentheses 2 years is stored in dark ?
No, that's a great question, and Kevin should answer that. But translate that to the drawdown, to the color standard. Like, how long can those things live before they change? So, Kevin, take it away.
Yeah, basically, the Pantone book, obviously you keep that in the dark, you keep it out of the light, you keep it from hands, you keep it from oils and whatnot, that's fine, but that means you're not using it. The pigments themselves that are printed in the Pantone book, a lot of them are very fugitive. Obviously, you don't want to even look at a fluorescent. If you had a fluorescent book open in your lab for 5 months, a lot of those colors would disappear, just the chemical makeup of them. So the Pantone book, reflex blue, violet, purple, rhodamine, they're substituted anyways. In the Pantone book, those are very fugitive pigments. So the book itself, the actual inks used in the industry that we use as substitutes would last a lot longer than them. But then again, the paper, the optical brightener on the substrates, those will start to diminish as well. So there's a bunch of variables that can contribute to the life of a book. You can have it on a press, you can have it out every day. That life's going to be a lot shorter than someone putting it in a drawer for 2 years. And again, I understand that. We try to do that as well. We try to pick a book every year to our specific customers who are very critical, and we take it from the same batch because we know that even batch to batch to batch, and I don't want to get into the inconsistencies of that, but we usually use a year if it's being used quite often. If you want to put it away and hide it and keep it in the dark, and pull it out once or twice, I mean, you'll probably get a couple of years out of it. But again, that really means you're really not using it that often. So it's the use of it. It's the opening. It's the exposure to light, exposure to the elements of what it's coming into.
And so for related to that, light standard dark or, a print standard, how long can that last? You see ones that are 7 years old, 4 years old. How long do you think an LSD or print standard really is good for? I mean, I have my own thought, but I'm curious to. Yeah, that's a question for you.
Yeah. Again, it's how it's handled. A light standard, what is the color? The color, if it's fugitive, if it's the yellow and it's made out of Pantone Yellow 12 and in lithyl rubine, it has a shorter life than on the blue page, which has a shorter life, and the pastels have a much shorter life. The color itself is also going to dictate it. How you protect that? A lot of people will put it in a folder and have a mylar paper over it too, so it's not getting exposed to a lot of oils and hands and handling itself. So I think it varies from color to color in how you're handling it. Ron, we see it in the press room. They'll pull it out of a job ticket, and it looks like they stomped on the floor on it. So I mean, you're chasing something that and again, that would be the physical part of it. So after X amount of repetitions of the same color, I think you need to reproduce a print. I would say at least every 6 months you should reproduce a print if it's commonly used in the ink room, making sure it's still hitting the LAB numbers, but having that physical print again. And a good way to do that is just pull out all the old ones, and you can just lay them out like a deck of cards, and you can see them all just like all different shades going across and all different oils and handlings going on there.
Yeah, we've heard brands, globally, with their teams, from creatives to standards groups to operations saying, books are to be used for visual reference only. And, it just really depends. And so there's all kinds of answers. Sonja, there was a question for you. How do you define and handle LAB data on metallic substrates?
For us, unfortunately, for metallic substrates, it becomes a visual match. I can't remember. I think Danny had mentioned it. You need a really expensive reader in order to actually capture the data for metallic inks. Now, Kevin, you might speak a little bit more to this also. I think that your ink vendor, if they're dealing with a lot of metallic ink, should actually own a spherical reader so that they can actually capture that lab data, the LAB data, and be able to give it to you so that you can communicate it. But as we spoke about also with the metallic inks, there is some differences only because the metal, and Kevin, I might be saying this wrong, so chime in.
No, it's okay.
The metal that's in the ink is a big effect on it. So not only are you dealing with the pigment before the metal is added to it, but you're also dealing with how much metal or how big are the metallic pieces that are in there that are making that reflection. Yeah,
and that gives it the brilliance. Again, there's different metal flakes. The larger the flake, the brilliant it is, the less resistant it is to any damage. So, so to answer the question, as far as metallics go, I'm not lost my train of thought here. I'm sorry. So no, but as far as metallics go, it's basically
measuring
the particle size, and then when you're trying to measure it, there's a refraction on there because the metal comes to the surface and it refracts the spectrophotometer or a densitometer more easily. So you can read the same thing twice; it looks exactly the same, and you're going to get seriously different readings.
Yeah. Metallic ink is definitely not my favorite. It's definitely my most challenging, and it's really unfortunate that it's my number one seller.
Well, we're at the very bottom of the hour, and unfortunately, we were not able to get to all the questions. But I wanted to thank everybody that's on the call from around the world, and I especially want to thank all the presenters today: Sonja, Kevin, and Danny and Ron for all your information and sharing very, very enlightening information on the subject. So if anybody wants to get in contact with us, please email us at idealliance.org. Be happy to answer any questions for you. We hold these BrandQ webinars every month, and this actually will go out to you immediately following this event. So you'll be seeing in your mailbox. So thank you so much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you again.
I appreciate you having us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Yep.
Yeah, take care.
Bye.